Welcome everyone to another episode of Follow the Light Music Review. My name is John De Laurentiis, and this is going to be episode 2 of Revisiting the Classics, where I'm going to look at an album that has blessed me and has been a classic in my estimation and for many years. And this is from an artist that has blessed me, I highly respect, and this album in particular that we'll be looking at is one that is my favorite of this particular artist, and one that has blessed me for years, and one when I put on, I'm blown away by it. Still blown away by it. The musicianship, the ministry in the lyrics. It's a fantastic release. So before I get into it, I would please encourage you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and ring the bell so that you can get notifications for all the content that I'll be adding in upcoming weeks in the different series that I've started. So again, this is episode 2 of Revisiting the Classics, and today's spotlight is going to be on an album by Steve Camp called Fire and Ice. This is an album that came out in 1984. And this marked a changing point for the music of Steve Camp. This was a harder rocking, power-packed album that features so many classic songs on it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what came before this, just so you can see what the transition was if you're not familiar with Steve Camp. But this is my CD, original CD copy of it that came out by Sparrow Records. This is when they were first coming out with releasing albums on CD, something that made me very happy because I had my first CD player, believe it or not, I bought in I think it was somewhere around 1984, 1985, I bought my first CD player. So they were new in the country, the CD players at that time. So when I went and bought my very first CD player, they were a new technology, and there wasn't a lot of CDs available at that time. I remember going into the stores and they were just starting to make space for CDs, but there were still predominantly albums and cassettes, and the CD selection was very limited. I remember going to the mall after I got my CD player and maybe having 30, 40 titles to choose from. There wasn't much. And I remember my very first CD that I bought was a mainstream one. It was by Jeff Beck called Blow by Blow. It's a classic instrumental jazz album, which I still have to this day and still sounds fantastic. But then of course the CDs started in the Christian realm, started to be released, and at the time in Rock Tower newsletter, which I was putting out at that time, I remember putting out an article about wanting more Christian music get released on CD, and it started happening. And this one may have come out around 1990 on CD. I did have the vinyl of this. I no longer have it. I have the lyric sheet for it, but I don't have the vinyl for it. But this was one that blew me away. And at that time, in 1984, 1985, that was when I was really discovering Christian music. If you watch my first introduction to the channel, you'll see my journey into really discovering and getting into Christian music to a large extent. And this was one of my earlier albums that I had bought after my discovery around 1984 of Christian music. So this is a great album, but I want to go into a little bit of what came before this to show you how much this album was a change for Steve Camp. Definitely a harder rocking album, just so many memorable songs on here, and a potent message throughout it. So let's talk about what came before this album. All right, Steve Camp, and I do have some of these original albums here, which I'll go over for you. Steve Camp actually debuted here with Saying It With Love. This was his debut album, and this album here is from let me get my magnifying glass here just so I can give you the right date. It's 1978, debut album. And Steve Camp debuted not as a rock artist. He was more like pop, adult contemporary. He had shades of the sound of Elton John. So think of like some of Elton John's poppy, some of his orchestrated songs. there's some songs in these earlier albums that sound that they could be like Elton John songs. It was with the keyboards and all of that. So this album here, his debut, is a Mellor album. Like I said, pop, adult contemporary, came out on Myrrh Records, and one of the notable songs on here is "Song for Mom." He also does a cover of a Larry Norman song, "Strong Love, Strange Peace, and Diamonds." So I believe Larry Norman and Steve Camp obviously knew each other, and they collaborated too, because there's also a song in here that's co-written with Larry Norman called "If I Were a Singer." All right, so this was the debut album. Like I said, very poppy, very adult contemporary, and like I said, shades of Elton John type mellower stuff that's on here. So that was where it all started for him. And then he came out with his second album, was called "Start Believing." I actually have the original cassette. I don't think I ever had this one on vinyl, but this is the original cassette. Came out in 1980 on Myrrh Records as well. And this one here has the song, one of his best songs ever is on here, "Ambassador in Chains," which is a song about the Apostle Paul. That's the song. If you want to see the Elton John connection, listen to that song. It sounds just like an Elton John song. It even has a piano break in it that sounds like something that would show up on an Elton John song. So that's on this particular album here. And some other ones, "Under His Love" was on here. "Start Believing," the title track. So that was his second album that he came out with. And like I said, I just have my cassette on that. Then he came out with "For Every Man," and that was in 1981. And this one has, this is the back here, so you can see the back. This one has another song that would be a signature Steve Camp song called "Run to the Battle" is on here. And "Jesus on Our Side," Farther and Higher" is on here. "Jesus Drawing Me." So again, these three albums continuing in that kind of pop, adult contemporary type sound. And then they came out with a best of called "Only the Very Best," which had some tracks that were drawn from those three albums here. And "Run for the Battle's" on here, "Song for Mom's" on here, the "Strong Love, Strange Peace with Diamonds" Larry Norman cover is on here. And then something happened, and that was that Steve Camp decided he wanted to move a little bit away from the pop adult contemporary sound, and he wanted to get more a more rock sound. Maybe it was Larry Norman's influence, I don't know, but he wanted to get more rocky. So he delivered an album to Myrrh Records called "It's a Dying World." And this album was rejected by Myrrh. They weren't too keen on the fact that he was getting into this rock sound. I guess they were more comfortable with him being a pop adult contemporary artist, and they did not support this album. So how did it get out? Well, it came out after the Fire and Ice album. So Steve Camp left Myrrh Records, and he signed on with Sparrow Records, which was a relatively new label by Billy Ray Hearn. And Sparrow Records, he sent the songs for Fire and Ice to Billy Ray Hearn for that label, Sparrow, and they accepted it, released it, and when it became very popular and successful for Steve Camp, then Myrrh came back and released this album after Fire and Ice. However, this album precedes Fire and Ice. This album came before. So you get a taste on this album of what the rock and roll Steve Camp was like. Even the cover is more rock and roll than those earlier ones I just showed you. And this one has, it's amazing how if you listen to this album and then you listen to Fire and Ice, how they were going for songs that are very similar rock style. So when we get into Fire and Ice, you'll see the opening track, "Upon This Rock," one of his classic songs. The song that opens this album is called "Holding On To You," also in a similar vein musically as the opening track of Fire and Ice. "He Is Good," the second track, which is more of a rollicking keyboard-based song on Fire and Ice, is kind of almost matched by here, Don't Want to Be Friends on here. So it's like they were trying to do songs that were similar to this. And in fact, one of the songs, Light Your Candle, is on Fire and Ice, and it's also on here. So this is the earlier version of Light Your Candle. And the earlier version of Light Your Candle is available on CD, the one track on this, A Library of 32 Favorite Steve Camp Songs. The original version's on here. And the only other song that made it to CD from the It's a Dying World was It's a Dying World. That showed up on this particular collection called the Definitive Collection. And this Definitive Collection is his Myrrh record stuff. So what's on here is all the stuff from the early Myrrh album. So the only CD of the song, the only availability of some of the songs on those earlier albums on CD is from this Definitive Collection. In fact, most of the For Every Man album is on here. I think there's like 7 tracks that are on here that are represented on here. It's a Dying World is on here, which ends it. And there's some tracks here from Start Believing and from Saying It With Love. So that's the only CD of certain songs on there. And unfortunately, Myrrh Records has never released those official albums on CD. So Saying It With Love, Start Believing, For Every Man, Only the Very Best, which is a compilation album, and It's a Dying World have never been released on CD, which I think is a shame. That all of them should be released on CD. They are, like I said, poppy and adult contemporary, but they're really good, strong songwriting on there. And it's a shame that aspect of Steve Camp's musical ministry has been woefully neglected and not put on CD. And especially It's a Dying World. I would love to see that album on CD, because that's where he started doing the rocky stuff that people loved on his Fire and Ice album. Which is the one we're going to be talking about here. So Fire and Ice was the album, the rock album that Steve Camp wanted to make. But of course, he wrote new songs for this after the It's a Dying World, because those songs obviously were shelved by Myrrh until the success of this one. And this particular album, this marked, when I said a change in his musical ministry, it was not only in terms of him becoming more rocky, but right about the time after he left Myrrh Records, he befriended Keith Green, and he went and actually visited Keith Green in his last days ministries, and I think it was about 6 months or 6 weeks, actually I think it was about 6 weeks before Keith Green passed away in that tragic airplane accident. So they became friends, and then shortly after that, Keith Green passed on to heaven, and there's some sense, I think, that Steve Camp thought that he needed to pick up the mantle of ministry, that fiery ministry that Keith Green now left behind because he had passed, and he would pick up the mantle and continue that. And so Fire and Ice is definitely a great rock album. It opens up, like I said, with one of the best opening tracks of his catalog, Upon This Rock. Rocker, great musicianship on this album from beginning to end. The musicianship is superb. The guitar solos, the riffs, and like I said, this is not all straight rock. So Keith Green, I'm saying Keith Green because we were just talking about it, but Steve Camp did not abandon the more poppy type stuff, because that's on here as well, but there is that more rocky thing, rocky songs on here, like Upon This Rock, that are on here. Heart of Stone, what a phenomenal song that's on here. Another great rocker, great guitar solos, and it gives the lyrics of what he's talking about a punch. Really fiery lyrics throughout the entire album. Now, this album did have 2 #1 hits. All right, so it was successful. The one of the songs that was a #1 hit was "Living in Laodicea," and that particular song was a #1 hit, and that's more of a mellow song, but it's dealing with the what Steve Camp thought, that I've been living in Laodicea. In other words, I've been living in a lukewarm Christianity, and I want that to change. So that was a number one hit. The other song that is of note on here that was also a number one hit was Love's Not a Feeling, which is a duet with Michelle Pilar, and actually is Steve Camp's only I can't speak Grammy today. It's Steve Camp's only Grammy nominated song. All right, got it right that time. And that's on here too. It's a beautiful, mellow type ballad with Michelle Pilar sounding great on here. And then there's a lot of other rockers on here, like Squeeze, the title track, Fire and Ice. You know, it's Fire and Ice, it's Darkness or Light, it's One Way or Another. An updated version of Light Your Candle, which is one of the highlights on here. This version here is better than the version that's on It's a Dying World. It's more, the guitar riff has been beefed up. The guitar solo's really good. And, you know, another great song on here, What Would the Devil Say? Another kind of rocker. And then Where Are the Heroes is kind of like a mid-tempo, maybe pop rocker that ends the particular album there. So this album is just a fantastic representation of the rock side of Steve Camp. And it would continue on to his next album after this, Shake Me to Wake Me, which was even more strong with some of its lyrical content. Now, eventually Steve Camp would kind of move back into that pop, adult contemporary type sound later on in his career. He started mellowing out, but he did have a series of albums that were had those rock roots on there. Albums like Justice, and there was also two albums that he did that were on the mainstream label mainstream label Warner Brothers, on their imprint called Warner Alliance, which was for a brief time a label that was going to put out Christian artists to try to expand their listenership out to a larger audience. So there is a two albums that he did on the Warner Alliance label. One is Taking Heaven by Storm, which I think I have somewhere over here. Yeah, this is Taking Heaven by Storm. What's interesting about this is he does It's a Dying World on here, but it's a mellow version of it. He takes the It's a Dying World, kind of takes the bite out of it. It's a nice version. Michael Omartian produced this album and plays on this album, but this version is a more like a mellower version of It's a Dying World. So that's on here on the Warner Alliance first one. And then he also did a second one, Mercy in the Wilderness, also on Warner Alliance. That was his bid, not his bid, but his exposure to a larger audience at that time. And I believe I saw him live at the Creation Festival in 1994. And I believe at that time, Taking Heaven by Storm, I think was, let me check the date on here, 1993, this one. Yeah, so this is, I think it was his current album at the time of that concert. That was at Creation 94, and where I saw him there. So he did kind of mellow out as he went on, and he put out a bunch of albums. And at some future episode, I'm going to cover more about Steve Camp, maybe do a whole discography, looking at my favorites, maybe a ranking of my favorite Steve Camp albums, for the ones I like the least to the ones I like the best. I can tell you right now, Fire and Ice will be no surprise to be at the number one spot for that. Great album, classic, and you know, it's an album that even if you're predominantly someone who listens to like harder rock or metal, it's a great album. In fact, I think it would be a great thing to have a metal band do a cover version of Run to the Battle, because that's a song of Steve Camp's from the earlier days that I think would be great if a metal band covered it. You know, just some food for thought there. So that's it. That's my revisiting the classics with Steve Camp, Fire and Ice. And I can say this because Greg Hayes of Girder Music has kind of let the cat out of the bag on a recent email that I received, that this is in the works for a reissue, a much needed reboot for this particular album. And let's hope that Greg can successfully get more of the Steve Camps work out on CD. But this one is definitely in the works. I can say that because he put that out on an email, and I've worked on it already as the copy editor. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this one get a reboot, get the girder treatment, and get out on CD sometime this year. I don't know when that's going to happen. Could be a few months from now, but it is in the works. And let's hope and pray that more of Steve Camp's catalog can get out there. I know that Greg Hayes is working directly with Steve Camp. So those who are wondering about, is the artist involved? The artist is being involved. Girder always tries to get the artist involved when they put out releases. You know, even though they license them, and when you license an album, you don't have to get permission from the artist to release it. If you license it, you pay the record company, owns a lot of these albums, and you can release it. But Girder always, and of course the other two labels, Retroactive and Rox Records, they always want the artist's input toward the releases that they're coming out with. So I do know that Greg has been in talks with Steve Camp. So let's hope we can see more of this kind of stuff. In fact, I'd love to see a box set of Steve Camp's albums as well. So let's all hope for that. But this one is definitely on the radar for 2025. So let's hope everything works and it gets out there, because I would love to see this rebooted into a nice, fresh, remastered version with a really updated booklet and everything. Because this particular album, when it was originally released on CD, I'll just show you, it just opens up to a blank side and just some credits over here, no lyrics. So it would really be great to get this properly released with the girder treatment. So that's it for today. That was episode 2 of Revisiting the Classics. Thank you for joining with me. I would say to you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and spread the word about the channel out. I'm going to be doing a lot of content with all these different series, and I really hope you join with me, and I really appreciate it. So in closing, I'd like to tell you and inspire you to follow the light that shines out of the darkness. God bless everyone. Bye-bye.